Good everyone, I am AzureBlaze, and in 1998, Nintendo released a game that became a pillar of the action-adventure genre. Generally considered one of the highest rated games of all time, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is the first 3D Zelda in the series and can probably be considered the basis for many games to follow. The year is now 2023, and I have recently finished the game. Therefore, I thought it would be neat to go over the product, look at what worked and did not work, compare with modern day Zelda titles, and discuss my overall final thoughts on it. Therefore, I present my thoughts on The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. First, I would like to dive into some context. I've been looking to play this game for a while, having started it many times over the years on different platforms before ultimately dropping it after. This was not because I did not enjoy the game or anything of that nature, however I found myself always leaving big gaps before returning and trying to remember where I was up to all the time. This is a problem I have with many different games, not specifically this one. However, the Zelda series tends to fall into this situation a fair amount with myself. Over the most recent years, however, I have been trying to place more dedication into finishing games before I move into another, to the point of keeping a sort of journal to make sure I do not unnecessarily drop games due to my own lack of patience. With this new dedication, I have been able to finish more games, including the Link's Awakening remake and Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, the latter of which I purposely pushed to finish before the release of Tears of the Kingdom. Another game I initially planned to finish before Tears of the Kingdom's release was Ocarina of Time, of which I started on Nintendo Switch Online after finishing Age of Calamity. Anyone who has been following my channel over the previous months will most likely know that I have had many different things happening surrounding Residence, and that, with what I feel is fairly safe to say a misassumption on how long it would take to finish, caused the game to be slowly chipped away at alongside Tears of the Kingdom over a fairly long amount of time. However, I have finally finished the game, and with that, I can share my thoughts on it. Starting with the cons of the game, Ocarina of Time is roughly 25 years old as of the recording of this video, and with age comes some things that subsequently have not carried over as well to the modern age in my opinion. In saying that, I would like to look at the game as well through the lens of the time it was released in. The first big sticking point for myself were the general controls and navigation. The main controls worked quite fine, and I can imagine were probably of quite high standard for the time this game released. My biggest criticism with the controls, however, is probably their finickiness and lack of overall reliability I found in certain situations. This was somewhat exemplified by my control method, that usually being Joy-Cons as I would mostly play in handheld. Many a time I would have some trouble with any of the equipped items that could be used by the directions of the right stick in my case. I spent quite some time battling with using an item from one direction for it to register me moving the stick in another item's direction. Understandably, this is quite a bit to do with my control method. However, the ability to change the control scheme, such as applying the equipment selection to the D-pad, I feel would have gone some way to mitigating the problem. In saying that, I think this is much more of an issue with Nintendo Switch Online, however, not necessarily Ocarina of Time. And most other things I had in regard to movement was more down to it slightly aging as controllers continue to be refined over the years. Things such as how the shield is used and having to be in a specific style of standing or walking to push or climb objects can generally be quite finicky to work with, and whilst I never really got used to it, I did come to play the game with it in mind. Navigation and equipping are another sticking point. Having to quite often open the menu and move it left and right to change equipables and select different items was generally a little bit tedious. However, not a huge nor overly frustrating issue overall, and it generally did not take away most of the enjoyment I had playing the sequences. Apart from navigation and control, the game's lack of ability to discreetly direct the player, at least in my case from what I could see, was quite problematic many of the time. I often found myself getting stuck in areas, eventually residing to look up a guide with a common thought of, how was I meant to know to do that, coming up quite a bit. Whilst this issue is probably not as bad or non-existent to a fair number of players, as someone who generally likes to blast through campaigns without looking around for hidden instructions and such, I found myself in the situation of looking up what to do fairly often. However, apart from all of that, I feel I do not have much left to say regarding the cons of the game for myself. A fair amount of what I have spoken about as well can be all linked back to its age and the limitations at the time, coinciding with how I choose to play the game and others like it, rather than specifically being negatives about Ocarina of Time itself. When discussing things I like about the game, I feel there are a fair amount more examples. Therefore, I shall try to keep them somewhat a little bit more brief. Starting with the general gameplay, of which I found to be quite fun. I think it holds up fairly okay over time, with general movement working well, and combat usually being quite engaging once I figured out what to do in a situation. I ended up finding all of the dungeons to be quite entertaining and the puzzles usually quite fair, bar the times I had to look up what to do in some situations. A special mention goes to the Water Temple, of which I had a fair amount more fun in than what I was expecting after hearing all the criticism surrounding it. Being a Zelda game, the overall music is great and really fits with whatever mood is being displayed at the time. In gameplay, the simplicity of only using a small amount of notes when playing the ocarina helps to show how creative the sound team could get within these restrictions, and I quite like how each song is available in the menu to see, as it is somewhat easy to forget them in my case. I think the only one I really remembered by the end was Zelda's Lullaby. Other sounds, such as character voices and world sound, whilst I feel have aged somewhat, tend to fit in quite well in my opinion. The story was probably my favourite part of the game. I think it is overall really well written and holds up quite good now in the current day. I quite enjoy that it does not do the modern trope of having the villain as a sympathetic bad guy, as Ganon is pretty much completely evil. Like the story, I think the characters are written well and often quite comedically. A fair amount of the side characters Link meets throughout his adventure are simply silly, goofy people who add quite a fair bit of charm to the world that is generally quite bleak and dark after Ganon's takeover. The main characters, such as the sages, Navi and Zelda, both as Self and Sheik, I think are portrayed excellently overall, and despite what I have heard about Navi over the years, I ended up quite enjoying their companionship with Link.
Hello.
When comparing the game to modern day iterations in the franchise, I feel it is safe to say that it can somewhat show its age. However, most impressively in my opinion, Ocarina is in full display of the bones it provides other games to build off it. The experience itself as well holds a fair amount of unique elements that, thus far, I have only seen in it and none of the other games I have played. I think this uniqueness, as well as the building blocks it lays down, allows the game to stand alongside the more modern entries in the franchise. And sort of to conclude on my overall thoughts of the game, whilst I did have some problems that bugged me throughout the playtime, I feel the overall experience I had playing the game was exemplary. I think it very much deserves the praise and recommendations it gets from fans. And those are my overall thoughts on The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. On to another topic quickly. I did say previously that this week's video would be a fun idea I had, however I have decided to push back that idea a bit, as I am looking for the right game to sort of start it off with, I guess. Another thing is that the next couple of weeks at the very least will have some content that I am excited to bring out when it comes to Sonic Frontiers, as at the time of this recording, the final DLC comes out really soon. I apologise for my bird throughout this video. She has been really loud and somewhat frustrating, however, yeah, there's not much I can do about it right at the moment. I can move her out of the room, however she's going to yell louder to try to talk to me, therefore I'm not sure really what to do. However, for now I believe that is all from me. I hope everyone enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I shall be back in the next one. Cheers everyone.